Here's the top 10 fantasy wide receivers heading into the 2020 season. Don't forget, hit the subscribe, the like, and the notification icon so you can stay up to date with all this great content from the RotoHeat.com team.
Everything's on fire. Everything's on fire. Everything's on fire.
Coming in at number 1, obviously, Michael Thomas, wide receiver, New Orleans Saints. In 2019, Thomas saw 185 targets between Drew Brees and Teddy Bridgewater. He caught 149 of them for 1,725 yards and 9 touchdowns. 80% catch rate is insane. When you look at the other top 10s on our list, 80 is at least 9 points higher than anyone else. And his 11.6 yards per catch isn't the top of anyone in our top 10 list, but it's definitely no slouch either. 2020 looks to be another big season for Michael Thomas, returning Drew Brees and that potent New Orleans offense. And he is a guy that we learned last year is quarterback protected. He can be successful with anybody behind under center, and that bodes well for Michael Thomas. So he's definitely a guy that we're willing to take at the top of the boards. Coming in at number 2 in our consensus rankings, Davante Adams, wide receiver, Green Bay Packers. Year 2 in the Matt LaFleur system should prove to be well for Davante Adams and this whole Green Bay offense. They added key pieces in guys like A.J. Dillon to help bolster that running game to open up the opportunity for the pass. Green Bay tried in the offseason to add some pieces to that wide receiver room with Devin Funchess, but unfortunately opting out. We are kind of stuck seeing the Davante Adams show at wide receiver again, but that's okay because Davante Adams had 127 targets last year, caught 83 of them for just under 1,000 yards at 997 and 5 touchdowns. That gives him he's been averaging about 17 points per game last year. Now, unfortunately, he only played in 12 games, so health could become an issue. But we think if he's healthy and you get at least 12 to 16 games out of him, you are going to get wide receiver 1 numbers on a week-to-week basis. And with that, we're okay with taking him at the top of the wide receiver boards. Coming in at number 3, Julio Jones, wide receiver, Atlanta Falcons. This is no surprise because Julio Jones has been a wide receiver 1 for a very long time. The talented wideout from Atlanta had 157 targets last year, caught 99 of them for 1,394 yards and 6 touchdowns. He broke the moniker of not being able to get touchdowns in the last 2 years, having 8 and then 6 this last year. He averages roughly 18 points per game, and that's strong numbers, especially from a wide receiver who is getting up there in age. The thing that is really surprising as we're putting together these numbers is he had a 14.1 yard per catch rate, and that's pretty high amongst all the guys that we have on this list. It actually comes in the top half of the guys on this list. So he's a big play threat anytime he gets the ball in his hands. This offense is going to look better and going to look stronger because they've added guys like Todd Gurley to help that running game, because we know that Freeman was injured quite a bit last year, so they had to focus on the passing game. Losing Austin Hooper could be a problem, but could also give Julio Jones even more targets in 2020. We're excited for him. We think he'll be a top 5 receiver and help your fantasy team this year. Coming in at number 4, DeAndre Hopkins, wide receiver, Arizona Cardinals. Now, obviously, we know what he looked like when he was in Houston. You know, he was always targeted very highly. Last year, he had 150 targets. He caught 104 of them for 1,165 yards and 7 touchdowns. That should not change going to Arizona. Arizona is a high-powered offense. They look to move the ball quickly and have a lot of plays, and they look for chunk plays. DeAndre Hopkins has arguably the best receiver, one of the better receivers in history, in Larry Fitzgerald with him, as well as some under-the-radar type guys and some running backs that, you know, are strong running backs. He hasn't had a running back like Drake with him in most of his time in Houston because of, you know, whether it was injuries or guys not being able to stay on the field. DeAndre Hopkins has probably the best offense that he's had in some time around him, even though I don't know that Kyler Murray is an upgrade from Deshaun Watson because they're both extremely strong quarterbacks. DeAndre Hopkins should still get himself somewhere around the 150 target range. If he can still catch, you know, almost 70% of those balls, you are going to see a top 5 fantasy producer this year. Coming in at number 5 on our list, Tyreek Hill, wide receiver, Kansas City Chiefs. Now, in our top 10 list, he is the least targeted at only 89 targets. He caught 58 of them for 860 yards and 7 touchdowns through 12 games in the 2019 season. He is not the biggest yards per catch guy on this list, but he's pretty close. At 14.8, that puts him at number 3 on the list. So we know, and especially everybody knows this Kansas City offense is strong. It's high-powered, has a ton of weapons. As long as he's healthy, he had 89 targets through 12 games. A healthy him and a healthy Mahomes, I would expect him to get somewhere in the 120 range in this season. And if he's catching 65-ish% of them like he has been, you can see a continual growth in his production and see a strong 2020 fantasy season. Coming in at number 6, Chris Godwin, wide receiver, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We know with the emergence of Tom Brady and Gronkowski in town, everybody's excited. The hype train is rolling for the Bucs, and that spells good news for Chris Godwin. We know last year with Jameis under center, he had 121 targets. He got 86 of them for 1,333 yards and 9 touchdowns. That's big. He's going to get you, if he keeps up very similar production, you're going to get something like, 18 to 20 fantasy points per game out of Godwin. And that's big numbers. That's wide receiver 1. That's high-end wide receiver 1 numbers. And if you can get him at wide receiver 6, jump all over it. The team is excited about the future for Chris Godwin. There are a lot of mouths to feed, so there is going to be concern about who's going to be, the top target in this offense. But with Bruce Arians and the way that he likes to move the ball around, and we've seen Brady hasn't appeared to have lost anything on his arm, and his intelligence and ball placement are going to be better than what they had previously. The sky's the limit for Godwin in this entire Buccaneers offense. Coming in at number 7, Kenny Golladay from the Detroit Lions. As a Lions guy, this pick made my heart happy. I've seen Kenny Golladay to continue to develop, and we saw last year that he became quarterback proof. Even when Matthew Stafford went down, Kenny Golladay was still producing at a high level. He didn't have the best catch rate, but his quarterbacks weren't exactly throwing very pretty ball at him. He had plenty of opportunities, and he took advantage of them. He caught 85 of his 116 targets for 1,190 yards and 11 touchdowns. That is the most of any of the wide receivers on our top 10 list. He also, fun fact, had the best yards per catch rate of anyone on this list at 18.3 yards per catch. That's almost 3 yards per catch higher than anybody else on this list. And there's some big names on this list. He's going to get you, with a healthy Stafford, probably around 16 to 20 fantasy points per game. And that's a big thing. When you're looking for your wide receiver 1, if you can get him at the 7, at the wide receiver 7 price, that's big. Kenny Golladay can be a weekly producer for you and really help you be successful in 2020. Coming in at number 8, DJ Moore, wide receiver, Carolina Panthers. This one will be the most interesting of anyone on this list because the projection could be all over the place for him. With Matt Rule and a new college-type offense coming to the NFL, it's going to be interesting to see how they deploy DJ Moore with Samuel and some of these other pieces and McCaffrey. It'll be interesting to see how much passing they do and how much running they do to set up the pass. I mean, it's just having him at the 8 spot feels a little dangerous. So truth be told, the team put him at 8, but you have to be mindful. See how the offense is being deployed, and definitely listen to the tea leaves in training camp. Now, the team is excited because DJ Moore, the player, is uber talented. He caught 87 of his 135 targets last year, and he didn't exactly have the greatest quarterbacks thrown at him after Cam Newton went down. He had 1,175 yards and 4 touchdowns at a catch rate of 64.4. He had 13.5 yards per catch and was still averaging about 15 fantasy points a game. So we're pretty excited by the fact that even with Matt Rule and a new offense and all the things that he's going to have to learn, he should still be able to be a really solid wide receiver 1 this season for you. Coming in at number 9, Allen Robinson, wide receiver, Chicago Bears. Robinson is a receiver that has always seemed to have gone under the radar in fantasy, and he's one of the better receivers out there. Last year, even with Mitch Trubisky throwing the ball and however you feel about him aside, he still caught 98 of 154 targets for 1,147 yards and 7 touchdowns. He was still catching over 70% of the passes thrown his way. And we know that Trubisky isn't always great with his placement. He was still getting around 15 fantasy points a game. And if Foles can stay healthy and Foles is the man and it's not Trubisky, I would expect more than the 1,147 yards and 7 touchdowns because Foles can get it, and he's got a big arm too, but he's more accurate and he's had more experience. So even if it's Trubisky or Foles, I mean, I would expect 150 plus targets to be easily be the floor of where Allen Robinson's at because he's so good. He's so strong, and if you can get a wide receiver 1 at the wide receiver 9 spot, and he's a guy that could easily be a top 5 receiver, jump all over it. Allen Robinson's going to be great in 2020 and be very successful for your fantasy team. Rounding out the list at number 10, Odell Beckham Jr., wide receiver, Cleveland Browns. Kevin Stefanski brings renewed hope to this Browns team. And even with, all the craziness that was 2019, Beckham still was a successful receiver. He didn't have great touchdowns, but he had 133 targets. He caught 74 of them for 1,035 yards and 4 touchdowns. Not the best catch rate at 55.6, not the biggest yards per catch, but still solid at 14. Unfortunately, his fantasy points per game were under 15, which is the lowest of anyone on this list. But ultimately, 2020, Stefanski, there's renewed hope for Beckham in this entire Cleveland offense. Stefanski brings a very strong offense with him from Minnesota. He's been very successful getting his receivers lots of action, lots of targets, lots of good fantasy points. And we expect Beckham to push himself back into that category because it wasn't necessarily Beckham's fault that he only had 1,035 yards. That offense had tough times last year, and it wasn't great. And it's had its dips in production, But let us know in the comments: is Odell Beckham a wide receiver 1 for you? Does Davante Adams make it into the tops? Can he make it through more than 12 games? There's a lot of great information and great things that we want to talk about with you. So post them in the comments below, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Also, right there, playlist. Hit it. Watch the videos. Do it. You want to. Do it.